Hello, this is Mark Vanatta from University of Cumberlands. This is my final presentation um, video for the Operations Excellence class or Operational Excellence class for Dr. Jason Karp. Um, Going into it, the questions we were posed were, what did you learn about operations management based on the case studies? What are my own observations, some peer discussion posts, and based on the research that we conducted along the way? Some specific examples of the case studies that did impact my papers and the way that I conduct myself now and in the future after learning about the topics. And as an introduction, I have to say, operational management is more than just keeping the business going. It's more than just the different components and a kind of an assembly line structure of, this starts and then that stops and then this starts and that stops. It's all integrated. That's one of the things that going into this that I think was really kind of impactful to me. I was surprised that the depth of the discipline from a nuanced perspective. I had more of a linear view of operations management from kind of a WBS structure perspective. I was also somewhat intrigued by the case studies and the inability of some of the case studies to be able to see beyond what was going on and to take a step back, really kind of at the enterprise and see how all of it fits together and then solve those problems, because you don't see the gaps when you're so close to it. You're down in the middle of it. So I thought it was obvious, but evidently they were too close to the problem. From a case study perspective, each case study was different and they dealt with different issues and the components of operations management. Um, and so I thought it was really a good broad range of perspective, especially as we went through the book and as we went through the different components of operations management and the subcomponents. I think the case studies really brought out the points that were trying to be made in the course, and really kind of crystallized it in my mind of how that should go. Um, the one case study that I thought was really interesting was the Penang Mutiara. I have a problem saying that. Penang Mutiara, the high-end hotel providing premier services to guests. The cost wasn't a primary driver for them, even though it was surprising because cost is a primary driver. You have to control costs where you can, but because the customers expected luxury and they expected that immediate gratification over all others, cost was not the most important component to them. So you control costs where you can, but if it decreases your volume because the customers aren't happy, then you sacrifice cost for volume and you have that discussion. So I thought that was really interesting from that perspective. The ROI discussion really changes from a cost component to really more about volume and how do we get people in here because the cost is not that much of an issue and they're willing to pay for that immediate gratification and that luxury. The other one that I think one of the others that really got me was the Action Response Application Processing Unit, or the ARAPU. The understanding processes and the interactions between the processes, I think, is the key, and that's one of the main points of that one was enterprise view of process and handoff is usually where enlightenment happens. So again, when you're down too close into it, even if it's at the macro for you, which may be in your particular sphere of influence, there's always an enterprise level view of how things are put together. And until you step back and look at that enterprise level view of the process and where the handoffs are, again, you talk about starting here and going there, and there's a linear process. Well, it's not really that way. It's more of a here are the spheres, right? Think about a bunch of different circles with a process. You have inputs to the circle, you have the system that goes on within the circle, and it hands off to multiple different areas and back and forth and back and forth. And understanding how all of that fits together and understanding where those handoffs are and where the gaps might exist. So internally in the system, there may be process efficiencies that you can reach, and how you hand off and where you receive from, there may be efficiencies. So working together, both at the tactical or tactegic, as I like to call it, somewhere in the middle, and then the strategy level, that's really important and critical for understanding how all that is put together. And then looking at that, you can see where those gaps might be and see where those inefficiencies are and then address them. And I think that this case study really brought that out. Fixing the gaps is a different story, but at least understanding where they are, that's kind of the first step to recovery, as they say. The third case study, I think, that really brought me some clarity, and I thought it was interesting as well. I read it more as a story, and then I reread it again as a case study to look at some of the business components of that, was the NLB library in Singapore. They really had a top-down approach to innovation, which is, I'm sorry, but it's rare today in business when you get to an enterprise level corporate business, especially a global corporate business, it's unique to have that buy-in from the top down for innovation. Usually it goes back to cost and ROI and risk and those types of things. And yeah, they're doing that, but at least the culture was changed because of that. And once you get the culture changed and you get everybody from the top down to buy into that culture, that's where things really get driven, because it's okay to question the status quo. It's okay to say what about and play the what if game. And I think that's really critical for a company to evolve, to be able to see those things. And that really was an interesting one for me. They did the homework up front. So they did the research before they implemented. A lot of places don't do that. They just take a buzzword and then they go, we're going to do innovation. And then, okay, well, how do we do that? Right? And I think that's interesting. Getting the employees to buy into the vision was the most critical role. And I think that top-down level, once the CEO said, here's what we're going to do and here's why, and it's okay to challenge. And he created mechanisms along the way so that people could interact. Hey, I'm going to create a group. I'm going to create a study group. I'm going to go. There's a lot of different pieces they get involved in. And once they saw that he was really invested in the innovation, that's where the creativity came into play, and they were able to overcome a lot of that. Continuously seeking to improve and rewarding those that engage is really critical. If you just keep doing, here's your pay, come up with something new, that doesn't motivate people to do that. So yes, it's nice to have the intangibles, which are creativity, freedom, those types of things, and those are important. But you also have to be able to reward people for what they do and for having that kind of visionary approach. So how to be a better visionary leader was one of the things that was impactful. Leading by example, setting others up for success, and then really the way I look at it is you're really training your replacements. So, hey, look, I'm not going to be around forever, and guess what? I'm not the smartest tool in the shed, but I know what right questions to ask, and if I can train you up to take my job and even maybe exceed what I'm doing, I think we'll be better off. Overall, the case study is the holistic and enterprise view of the business, not just the componentized or compartmentalized piece was I think what was brought out overall, and the difference between improvement and innovation. Improvement, you take what you have and you make it better and you make more efficiencies, things, but it's still that, micro view or semi-macro view. It's taking that next step in evolution, so to speak, to say, what are we doing right and how can we completely change what we're doing to come out with something that's better, right? There's a difference. It's almost like it's an exponential change. That's the best way to say it. And innovation comes through challenging the status quo, looking at outside the box solutions. And I think that's a really great point. You got to look outside the box to look back in and see where you can change. My observations, we assume certain things about business. We take them for granted, surface value. I'm viewing business through a more critical eye. I think we all need to do that for efficiency, for design and flow, for interaction and customer relation. I think all of those are the things from my observation that really stood out. Peer postings, first thing was different cultural perspectives, and I'm talking fast because I'm trying to keep it under 20-minute video. But the first thing was the different cultural perspectives, because there are different cultures and different philosophies, and people have been raised in a different culture or raised in a different location or have different ways of looking at things and thinking of things. So even in the global economy, though, we tend to be a bit ethnocentric in our thinking, and that can be a limiter. It can be pretty myopic. The broader perspectives acknowledge that others have different experiences, which shapes their thinking. And I think that brought to the table, that's really where that diversity comes in. It's not so much diversity because, I'm a different race, I'm a different creed. It's all of those things put together, but it's a different way of thinking and approaching, and that's what's critical. So some of the exercises were math or data driven, so results all seem to be within the same small range, but each person seemed to identify an area that I didn't consider in that, right? So it was still a learning experience. It was a great way to hone each other, I think. From a research perspective, I was surprised at the fact that some mistakes were being made and the same issues kept being addressed. So you get the same things happening over and over, and everybody's reinventing the wheel all the time. I was really surprised at that people didn't take, or companies didn't take the time to go back and go, hey, let's take a step back and really look at what's been done already, and then be honest about it. Also, I was pleasantly surprised that it wasn't in my unique sphere of exposure. So, my North American U.S. type view of things wasn't something that was unique to cultural perspective on our end. So, what about the conduct now and in the future? And to wrap this up, I tend to compartmentalize the approach to operations. So I kind of put it in a bucket, and I put my preconceived labels on it, and I tend not to think innovative, because we think of operations as a low-level tactical thing, and it's really not. It's more of a strategic way of thinking and approaching problems. And I think that's where the change in my mindset is coming. I'm a strategic thinker, so I get bogged down in the details. So the tactical stuff, if you're too into the forest, you can't see the trees, and that's where I think that stepping back really is important. Um, I need to focus on the entire discipline, both strategic and also the tactical, to marry those two together so that there is synergy there. And then you start looking at, okay, well, if we do it this way strategically, how does that affect tactical? And if we do these things tactically, how is it going to impact the business, right? I think the innovation should be balanced against the mission, and we have to make sure that we apply it based on the ROI, not just the monetary ROI, but the overall return on investment for the company. And I think looking at things innovatively, looking at things with a different critical eye, figuring out how to marry the strategic and the tactical together, and how to keep all of that within the same mission and vision of what the company's trying to do is really the main thing that I got out of most of this class, was that there's things all up and down the food chain, from a tactical to the strategic and back down, that need to be handled, but also horizontal across the different operational components, and also the support components, HR and the overhead things that we do as well. So I think it was a very good class. I think it was really something that was eye-opening for me, and I'm really glad to have gone through it. I think I learned a lot. So that's it. Thank you.